All right. So today is July 6th, 2021. My name is Chelsea Lee, and I'm here with Dr. James Tang, and I will be conducting a shortened Chinatown interview. So thank you for being here today, and let's get started. Um,
Good.
so yeah, were you ever involved in the old Chinatown that is located in what is considered now as downtown Houston?
Oh, well, I grew up here in Houston, and when I was a youngster, I belonged to the Chinese Baptist Church, which used to be located on Lamar Street, which is the location of the present Brown Convention Center. And the old Chinatown was only, blocks away from that church. And my friends and I would occasionally, go there and have lunch or something like that. So that's the extent of my familiarity with the old Chinatown, but I am familiar with it.
Wow, yeah. So what restaurants, businesses, or other like establishments, Chinese establishments do you remember?
Ooh, yeah. Well, let's see. I think there was an On Leong Association that had their meeting place there, and I don't remember the name of any specifically names of any restaurants that I went to there, but I did. I think I did remember that association was located in that old Chinatown.
Um, can you specify maybe a little bit more about this association, and
Mhm.
what?
Well, from what I remember, it was a gathering place for the Chinese Americans who just recently immigrated from China, and they would. And as I recall, as a youngster, it was mostly older folks, and they would gather there and I think play mahjong and and have tea and socialize. So from what I recall, that particular restaurant was a meeting place of the older Chinese generation of people that mostly, were recent immigrants from China.
I see. So, how much space did this Chinatown occupy?
Oh, from what I recall, it was only like a block or so, and there were also some Chinese stores that were located there that sold Chinese goods and Chinese drugs and things like that. So I do recall that besides the Onlung Association and some restaurants, in fact, I think maybe the name of a restaurant that used to be located there was called Sun Deluxe. Sundeluxe, as I recall. So that might be the restaurant that I used to go to as a youngster. Sun Deluxe, and then there was a family-owned Chinese grocery store located there, and it took only about a block, just a small shopping center. Hmm.
Nice. Yeah. Do you recall the name of the grocery store that you mentioned?
Ooh, now that I don't remember. If it comes to me later, I'll let you know. It may, but I don't offhand. I don't remember it. But my family and I used to frequently buy our Chinese groceries there after church. We would drop by there and pick up Chinese groceries, and that was about the only place in Houston that we could get Chinese groceries when I was a youngster growing up.
Wow. Yeah. I guess what types of people would visit this Chinatown? Um, like immigrants, younger people, um, like what types of people would you recall
Hmm.
seeing?
Well, from what I remember, it's mostly older folks that, by then, but of course, back then, anyone over 50, I consider an older folk. So probably people in their 50s and 60s seem to frequent that area back then.
I see. Would you say most of the visitors over there, did they live near the area or would people commute to get there from different
Hmm.
places?
Oh, I didn't know where they lived, but I think now there were some families that lived nearby. In fact, it's possible that the owner of the grocery store actually lived behind the grocery store, from I remember. So I think there were people that lived close by or directly in the area, and then others like my family commuted. lived near the Hobby Airport area at that time, and we would commute to church, which was downtown, and then we would drive to the old Chinatown, and then after getting our groceries and such, then we would drive back home near the Hobby Airport area.
I see. I see. Do you know, or do you have an idea of maybe why these businesses would want to establish their stores in that downtown area, or like what attracted them to the downtown area
Hmm.
for their business?
Well, I think that was kind of a convenient area for people to get together, being that it was located downtown, and the main freeway that ran from about where we live was called the Gulf Freeway, and it ended downtown right near that area, within blocks of that area. So it was conveniently located back then, and then of course Houston was much smaller city when I was growing up in the 1950s. We only had about 750,000 people in all of Houston, compared to over 4 million nowadays. So Houston was a much smaller city back then, and that Chinatown was I think just conveniently located for people to get to.
Yeah, I see. Um, do you know maybe what the reason would be for the Chinatown in downtown to relocate to Bel Air now? Um,
Oh, well, one, the Chinese population in Houston expanded rapidly in the 50s and thereafter. My family was among one of the more earlier generation of Chinese to immigrate to Houston, and we're originally from the Toisan area of China, which is outside of the big city of Guangzhou. And then later on, we had more immigrants coming in from Hong Kong that were Cantonese speaking. And then after that, there were in the, I would say, 90s or so, then we had more people coming from Taiwan, more Chinese people coming from Taiwan. And then in the more recent 10 to 20 years, we've had a large influx of Chinese from mainland China. So there were several waves of migration of Chinese into the Houston area in the past 40 years. And so the Chinese population grew, quite a bit since I was growing up here in Houston in the 1950s. And so as the Chinese population grew, I think it partly, outgrew the limited area of downtown Houston, which back then was only one block. And so the Chinese businesses started, establishing in the Bel Air area. And back then, the Bel Air area was newer part of Houston, and there was much more room for expansion of businesses. And so gradually more and more businesses located on Bel Air, and then grew. I would say it started out near the Sharpstown Mall area, which is near the intersection of Bel Air Boulevard and Highway 59, and then moved further west. And then now, with Bellway 8 and intersection of Bel Air Boulevard, that seems now the more epicenter of the new Chinatown. And then as the Vietnamese population increased in China, especially after 1975, with the fall of Saigon, we had a large influx of Vietnamese people, and they also gathered in the Bel Air area too. So Chinatown also kind of morphed into Viet Town as well. So.
Yeah, that's super cool. Do you know if you saw some of the old businesses from downtown in the new Chinatown? Like, did the same businesses from the old downtown Chinatown area influence kind of the move, or was it kind of like new businesses just started arising in the Bel Air area?
Mhm. I think it was primarily new businesses and many more new businesses. I have to admit, I don't recognize any of the old businesses that were in the old Chinatown and then establishing in the new Chinatown area. But there were some. There were, but Chinese restaurants have come and gone over the years, and so I think some of the earlier ones may have just gone out of business as the owners grew older and retired, and so I think the businesses that are currently along Bel Air Boulevard and surrounding areas are mostly new businesses.
Okay, I see. Can you talk about the new current Chinatown in Bel Air as early as you can remember it?
Oh, well, my earliest memories of the new Chinatown would be probably, from the 1980s and 1990s. And at that time, I was practicing and living in Northwest Houston in the Cy-Fair area. My office was off of FM 1960 and Jones Road near Highway 290. And we live near there, but being that, excuse me, both my wife and I like Chinese food, we would go often for Chinese food to the Chinatown area. So I remember we would drive from Northwest Houston, and back then 290 was only a small 2-lane road, and now it's expanded into 6-lane highway. But back in the early 1980s, it was only 2-lane, and we would take 290 and relatively small streets like Derry, Ashford, and Eldridge down to Bel Air from where we used to live. And then I would say 25 years ago, the Beltway 8 was built. And so we started being able to take Highway 290 to Beltway 8, which would take us directly to Bel Air Boulevard, and it made the commute to the new Chinatown much shorter. And so, and there were a host of good Chinese restaurants that we liked in that area, like Golden Bow. Let's not get names of a lot of them, but that we used to like to frequent, and they would be located in the Bel Air area. Bel Air, Gessner was the intersection of Bel Air and Gessner was at one time kind of like the epicenter of the new Chinatown. And then, like I said earlier, as some more businesses opened up, they tend to migrate westwardly toward the Beltway, and then now past the Beltway to streets like Kirkwood, Wilcrest, and Kirkwood, and Derry Ashford. And so we used to commute. And then about 5 years ago, we moved to closer to Chinatown in off of Westheimer and Wilcrest. And being located closer to Chinatown was one of our motivations, actually, for relocating from Cy-Fair area to where we live now, in a subdivision called Royal Oaks. And so I'm only now 5 or 10 minutes from Chinatown, and we can visit our favorite restaurants more easily, and then of course buy Chinese groceries and things like that more conveniently than we used to.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah. And can you tell me a bit more about some of the first establishments that you remember? Were they more so restaurants, shops, maybe banks or something like that? Like what types of establishments, and maybe any names that you recall?
Let's see. Well, I've always through my business banked with Chase Bank, and Chase Bank. Well, let's see. Earlier was called Texas Bank back 20, 30 years ago, and they would have branches in Chinatown. In fact, Chase Bank located on Bel Air and Corporate is I think one of the larger banks in Chinatown, and I think they've been there for quite a few years, and I still do some of my banking there. But other banks that have risen in that area are like American Chinese Bank, Golden Bank, East West Bank, and so some of the new banks are actually from China, and then there are also the American banks like Chase and Bank of America and such. They all have branches in the Chinatown area, but like I said, also banks from Taiwan and from mainland China have also opened branches there. So another Chinese bank I think would be considered Metro Bank, which is also located there, and I think they cater to all the businesses that are in Chinatown and all the Chinese people that live in this area. So those are the banks that I recall as I was visiting Chinatown, and so there are more and more banks that have opened along there as well. But and then certainly restaurants and grocery stores, bakeries, and things like that have all opened up in the Chinatown area. And from what I can see, the business is prospering in the Chinatown area, even after we had a kind of hiatus with the COVID last year, where many of the businesses were shut down, but now many of them are opening back up, and it seems like business is starting to build up again in those places. I might mention that early on, when I was growing up in Houston, we really didn't have even dim sum, which is very popular Chinese lunch. And I recall that for good dim sum, we'd have to go to San Francisco or New York City. And then as time went by, more and more restaurants in Houston started offering dim sum. And now I think the dim sum in some of the Houston Chinese restaurants are as good as we can get anywhere. So we don't have to go to the East Coast or West Coast for good Chinese food anymore. Yeah. So that's really nice. But yeah, so for a long time, we didn't have dim sum here in Houston, or good dim sum, and good Chinese food too. But there are many good Chinese restaurants here now that I think are comparable to any in New York Chinatown or San Francisco Chinatown.
Yeah, that's very nice. And what would you say was like the demographic of the area during the time? Is it kind of similar to how it is today? Like the type of people that lived in Bel Air back then compared to now? Or would you say there's maybe more of a Chinese population now that the Chinatown has been uh, uh, in the area?
I see. Well, let's see. I think, there's certainly, more and more Chinese that are, moving into the Chinatown area. And then, of course, some of the recent immigrants would like to, live there because they can speak, Chinese and Cantonese, Mandarin to people there and congregate more easily. But also recently there've been a huge influx and growth in the Vietnamese population. So in the Bel Air area, not only are there Chinese, but there are also a large population of Vietnamese. But then as far as the Chinese population in Houston, a large amount of growth in our Chinese population has concentrated in Southwest Houston, in Fort Bend County, Sugar Land area, and Missouri City area. There are many Chinese families in that part of Houston, which is farther west and further south than the new Chinatown off of Bel Air. So I would say that not only is there a congregation of Chinese in the Bel Air Chinatown area, but also in southwest Houston in the Sugar Land, Missouri City area.
I see. Okay, I think I'm on kind of like my final set of questions, but do you know what the earliest Chinese businesses in Houston were, even if they were not in the downtown area? Do you know what these businesses might have been?
Good question. Yeah. Well, yeah, in my memory, some of the earliest Chinese businesses that I recall as a youngster growing up in Houston in the 1950s would be Chinese restaurants and grocery stores. Yeah, for some reason, we did not have as many Chinese laundries as other parts of the country. I know in Philadelphia and the East Coast and other places like that, the early Chinese population were involved in the laundry business. And I don't recall that being as much a factor here in Houston, but grocery stores that were owned by Chinese, they were not necessarily Chinese grocery stores. They would be, like mom and pop grocery stores. And many of them would be located in the Black parts of town that are mostly minorities. And they seem to prosper in those areas. And then I have an uncle who was one of the earliest restaurateurs in the Houston area. I think in the 50s, he and some partners opened a Chinese restaurant called the Ming Palace, located on West Gray, just outside of the River Oaks area. And that was one of the premier Chinese restaurants in Houston for many years in the early 50s and 60s. And I remember most of the Chinese weddings and birthday parties, things like that, were held at the Ming Palace restaurant. And so that was, I think, one of the earliest, bigger Chinese restaurants in the Houston area. But there were also a number of them that started in the South Main area. Most of them are all gone now, but off of South Main was and Kirby area, there were at least half a dozen or more prominent Chinese restaurants. See the names of them. Lee's Den was one that was in the South Main area. Let's see. Timmy Chan was one of the earlier Chinese restaurateurs here in Houston. And actually, he still has some restaurants that are open by that name. It's called Timmy Chan's. And let's see, trying to, I think, the G family in Houston owned some Chinese restaurants also in the South Main area. I forget the names of them, but of the restaurants, but they were owned by the prominent G family.
Yeah, okay, I see. And do you know if any of these restaurants or businesses are still here now? And if not, do you know if they were relocated or just?
Well, most of the ones that I remember from my childhood days growing up are no longer around. I think when their owners passed away, I think most of them ended up closing, and then new restaurants took their place. But I don't know of any of the restaurants that I used to know as a youngster being still around now.
I see. Yeah. So I think that concludes all of my questions. Is there anything that I might have missed that you would like to add?
No, I think that pretty much sums up my memories of Chinatown, the old Chinatown and then the new Chinatown, and how it's grown and changed over the years. So I think that covers it.